Hi, I'm Sumit Bose, and this is the Net Hero podcast. Who's it for? It's for you. If you care about the planet and you care about business. We believe that businesses are responsible for a lot of the damage that has been done to the planet, but they're also responsible for finding the solutions. We need innovation, we need ideas, we need people who are trying to make a difference, and that's what this podcast is about. If you know someone who is trying to make a change, then get them to come along on the podcast. Listen in every week, subscribe, and make sure that you follow us on social media. Our two news platforms, Energy Live News and Future Net Zero, cover everything we do. And this episode is recorded live, so enjoy. Once upon a time, many years ago, someone said it's the economy, stupid, and it got him elected. If you look at what's going on right now in the world, you can't get away from the fact that there's been a pushback on net zero, and obviously the recent Middle East conflict has forced prices up. The world seems to be in a bit of a turmoil positioning, what it's going to do. For a while there was consensus, now there seems to be a kind of breakup. So have we done the right things? Some say the real problem is business. Business has caused all of this. The way that we've run our economies has led to this enormous climate crisis and continues to lead to all these issues around kind of the cost of energy and where our energy comes from and what it does to the planet. Well, today's guest on the Net Hero podcast has sort of some empathy with that view, but also believes the way to fix this, the way to fix the earth in a way, does actually depend on capitalism. He's a high flyer who was part of the Google X team. He's written many books. He's got endless degrees and is much smarter than me. And he's woken up very early to join me on the podcast. So my thanks indeed to Tom Chi. Hello, Tom.
Hey there. Great to be here today.
Thank you very much for getting up early. And I love your background. I love it. It's got a bit of zen about it, as well as a bit of kind of like the books are there. I was trying to see what you've got there, but it looks quite interesting.
Yeah, it is a little zen, but there's lots of physical materials around. Like within arm's reach, I can solder a thing, mill a thing, cut a thing, glue a thing. And yeah, I've spent a lot of my life building things.
Before we get into, you've written a book about all this and what it's about. Give us a potted history of your background. So you started off as a physicist, is that right?
Yeah, my first job was as an astrophysicist at age 15, and I was an astrophysical researcher for 6 years with Harvard Smithsonian Lab for Astrophysics and also Cornell Space Sciences. Did studies of active galactic nuclei, star-forming regions in the infrared between 1 and 10 microns, built a bunch of instruments, put stuff in space, a decent amount of stuff.
At the age of 15, you were at university?
Well, 15 through 21. So,
oh my gosh.
So yeah, things happened over 6 years, but yes, I did start at that age. Yes.
Wow, absolute genius level. And then you're involved in Google.
Yeah, I was part of the founding team of Google X because they basically hired the leadership team, and the leadership team hired everybody else. So I was the head of product experience, part of the first 6 people that were brought onto the team.
Wow. So you've had experience, you were saying earlier, of building teams. You've had experience of obviously running very, very big, successful companies. But I think the essence of this book you've written, Climate Capital, seems to have started on a coral reef. So can you explain a little bit about that, which you talk about in your introduction to the book?
Yeah, I kind of had this very technical career, and, I both loved nature and I loved building things, but basically people only wanted to pay me to build things like, circuits, write code, run teams that do those sorts of things. So hardware, software, production, and deep research in some of these things. And given that, then I kind of built my entire career about, building technology effectively. And at some point, you raise up the ranks. I became an executive that ran a couple multi-billion-dollar businesses, and you have the extra money that we got a vacation home out in Hawaii. And that vacation home was a 2-minute walk from the front door to an astoundingly beautiful coral reef. To this day, still the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen with my own eyes personally. And given how close I live to the reef, whenever I was out there, you just have a snorkel on the hook by the door. Whenever you have a 30-minute break, an hour break, why not be in the water for 20 minutes, right?
I like it.
I spent a lot of time in the water and I really got to know the reef almost the way that a person knows their neighborhood and their neighbors. Like I literally knew where different organisms lived on the reef, who just had a family, which organisms from out of town that people are visiting and a little wary of. And I watched that reef go from every color of the rainbow and life coming out of every pocket and pore to gray and brown and no life in less than 8 weeks. And what had happened is we had a coral bleaching and a reef collapse event. That turns out is not a unusual thing these days, but for me, it was obviously a big shock to go from swimming the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life to gray brown like a graveyard. Like you hear no sounds either. It basically becomes totally silent. Well, a living room reef has a lot of sounds, activity, all sorts of things going on, and that feeling it left like the feeling it felt like it left a hole in my heart, and it basically asked me deeper questions about what I wanted to do with my time on this earth because I absolutely know how to make compelling tech, like work on a self-driving car or augmented reality glasses, or contribute to AI that's like
Yeah.
powering search systems and all that sort of thing. But those things, the reefs will just die if that's all I end up working on, or if that's the only sorts of things that society decides to work on. And I met with a bunch of coral scientists to go figure out the extent of the problem. And they told me that we are going to wipe out most of the reefs on planet Earth by the year 2055. And we are likely on a trajectory where we completely extinct them as an ecosystem from planet Earth. And that basically
Yeah.
woke me up and said, like, hey, well, you don't see any way that this stuff is converging toward a successful outcome, and success here being coral reefs get to survive another generation or and beyond.
Mm.
This we seem to be the last generation or two that will ever have coral reefs on planet Earth. And given that, it made me reflect, like, we could build a self-driving car in the next 10 years. And we basically did. From the time I had that reflection, it was about 12 years later that the Waymo car was released into the world. But I remember having that thought, we could make a self-driving car in the next 10 years, but we could also do that 50 years from now and life would generally go on. But we
Of
can't,
course.
time displace like working on the coral reefs and some of these big environmental issues, because if you wait 50 years, it's just gone.
It's gone.
And I spoke with about 2 dozen coral scientists about it. And I said, well, I mean, is there any chance? Like, what if we did lose it? Could they re-evolve? And they basically told me, yeah, it's always possible that something can re-evolve, but you should estimate that it would take at least 20 million years.
Yeah. I mean, I've been to I mean, I learned to dive in the Great Barrier Reef, and that was 25 years ago. I haven't been back since, but I've heard that bleaching, but I can't believe it happened in 8 weeks. Was it just a massive heat wave of water that came, or was there a bug? Was there some sort of starfish attack? How does it bleach so quick?
It was thermal
Right.
stress the way that it is for most of the reefs around the world. And basically, what happens is when it gets too hot, then the coral release their symbiotic zooxanthellae, which they use to get most of their food. 80,
Yeah.
90% of the metabolic budget in terms of food for the corals coming through the photosynthesis of their symbiotes. And once
Yeah.
they do that, they're basically starving. Imagine somebody only gave you 10% of the food that you need in any given day.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can eke along for a little bit, but by week 3 or 4, you are collapsing and dying. And shortly after collapsing and dying, then yeah, algae move in and they start to colonize and make it relatively hard for corals to reestablish. So no, it was fully bleached within 2 weeks. It was basically dead by week 5. By week 8, it was
Wow.
already having algal, grow in that was starting to crowd out what had been the reef.
So this has, affected you. I would say inspired, but probably shocked you. But and you have now started to look at this. And I said at the beginning, you've written a book about this called Climate Capital. And just have I got this right? What you're sort of saying is that kind of the things that are happening, the big swings in our ecosystem, you know, they're kind of driven by our you could call it greed, but the way our economies have been built over the last 60, 80, 100 years or so, and that these things are now creating a sort of a runaway engine where even though we talk about net zero, we talk about doing stuff, we're not really addressing them the right way, and that's because the economics of it all is not right. Have I got that right, or have I sort of twisted your words?
Well, Definitely the way that we are running, our approach to business and economics right now is leading to the results that we have, right? If you go and survey 100 people on the street and you ask them about nature, you're going to get very positive responses. People love
Yeah, of
nature, right? They
course.
have it as their desktop background. They love taking walks, all that sort of thing. So how did
True.
we create a world where, the average person loves nature, but collectively, we can't help but destroy nature in the process of moving around, eating a home, eating food. It's because we built an industrial economy that is aggressively destroying nature, even though the people, in that economy actually love it. Now, how does one build an economy like that? Because some people will say, well, economics, man, what can you do? It's just the invisible hand. It's like this is just what has to happen. But I think that that is a very incorrect view of what economics is. There are scientific disciplines and there are design disciplines and there are energy engineering disciplines. And I've been a scientist, designer, and engineer. And I think people try to pretend that economics is a scientific discipline. In fact, some people
Yeah,
call it the dismal science, but in practice, it is a lot closer to a design discipline. In a design discipline, there's many ways to go design a thing that lead to different outcomes, right? Like in Korea, they have fridges that have kimchi shells inside of them. And that's great. That's culturally appropriate. It makes a lot of sense and it sells really well in that market. Now, if you have a
yeah,
kimchi shelf and you sell it to a different part of the world, they just have nothing to do with it, or they need to invent something to do with it. That's a design difference that leads to a use difference, right? And different economies around the world, different national economies are also run a bit differently. And you see that that leads to different results. That is exactly what you'd expect from a design discipline. Science disciplines, like when I study the function of an active galactic nuclei, we actually are getting down to a foundational truth that will be true everywhere, no matter what.
yeah,
And that is a different sort of resolution. Now, if you believe that you're doing the dismal science, if you believe that you're doing a scientific discipline, when in fact you're doing a design discipline, you're going to make a lot of wrong choices. And not only will you make those wrong choices, you will pretend that the things that you discovered are immutable truths of the universe, the way that scientific disciplines resolve. This is why we have a bunch of economists basically say, like, no, it needs to follow these equations. I worked real hard on these
yeah,
equations.
yeah.
This is how economics has to happen. And it's like, no, for sure it doesn't, because look at the different places where they've applied slightly different rules and incentives. The other thing that, and you will get different outcomes, right? Now, another thing that I think people really miss about this is because of this, they kind of lead to this sort of inevitable sense of things, as opposed to just saying, like, well, why don't we add a kimchi shelf to ours? Like, our society needs a
Mm,
kimchi
mm,
shelf, right?
mm.
Metaphorically, right? Maybe your society has a particular sort of imbalance in terms of how many workers that are in industry versus in knowledge work versus whatever.
Yeah,
You can go
yeah.
change the design of the economy a little bit to be able to go address that. Instead, people go and pretend like it's a science. They feel like they're powerless in the face of this thing, and we don't have the right sorts of discussions. So we end up with people saying words like, "Oh, don't you believe in capitalism?" And again, that's another category error. You're treating capitalism like a religion. When people use the
Yeah,
word
yeah.
belief, they're way more likely to be talking about, like, well, are you a faithful follower of so and so, right? And we talk about capitalism like that as well. That's another category error. Capitalism is basically a tool that you can swap in for the phrase makes efficient. And efficient doesn't mean best for all cases, right? The US Post Office, it's inefficient for the US Post Office to deliver anything to Alaska,
Of course.
because literally by the time you get to these small towns in Alaska, you need to get on a separate little plane just to go carry five, letters to some distant town. There's no way that that makes economic sense when a postage stamp costs 40 cents, right? It's way more, just the fuel cost, just the cost of the pilot
Of
waking up in the
course.
morning
Yeah, yeah.
and going to the plane is more than the 40 cents that you're getting on that letter. But why do we build the post office the way that we do? We want to run as efficiently as possible while still guaranteeing access to everybody. Absolute capitalist efficiency would just cut off Alaska.
Yes, it would. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Or if they wanted to send anything to Alaska, you would need to spend $30, times five letters in the bundle for the plane to even take off and fly, 40 miles to go drop off five letters.
So if you look at this kind of where we've been over the last, let's go back 10, 15 years, actually, probably more than the previous period. We can go back a lot longer, but you've had this thing definitely probably since Kyoto, then the Paris Agreement, and you've had politics, you've had economics, and you've had science, right? Those three things. And the scientists say 1.5 degrees, and the politicians say, yeah, we're going to do this stuff. And then the economists say, well, hang on a second, that means this is going to cost us much more. We're seeing it right now. People want to go green. We've had a big debate about green energy, and yet the cost of it is now hitting people in the bills. And what are they doing? They're going back to fossil fuels. So have we got it wrong over these last kind of, whatever, 25 years, where we've looked at climate and we've put these models, as you say, we've made it kind of, the scientists tell us something, the politicians do that, and the economists look at it separate. Is there another way of looking at it?
Yeah, we definitely have gotten it wrong because we're now in the regime where the cost of responding to the damage from climate destabilization is massively more than the cost of actually just upgrading the core thing and solving the problem,
Yeah,
right? We now get hit by storms that generate $100 billion of damage in a day, where the LA fires basically ripped through LA and generated $275 billion of damage in 4 days, right? The actual cost of upgrading those systems was way cheaper. The actual
yeah,
cost of upgrading the industrial economy that is contributing to the intensification of those events are way cheaper. So actually, a rational economist would say, like, yo, you should invest in these things. If you invest in them, you will save a crazy amount of money. Now, that said, it's easier to go calculate with numbers that you have locally and have already happened. When you're trying to go calculate with new technologies that might be cheaper, cleaner, save you a huge amount of money, give you a lot more kind of structural resilience, then that has to be modeled. That doesn't have the cleanness of the calculation of here's how the cash flows went for the last couple of years, right? So but it is true that people are balancing a fully known set of costs and
yeah,
economics versus a thing that has some probability weight to it. But it's not out of the zone of economists or many other people to use probabilities in the way that they do their work. And if one were to just use the probabilities and expected values, it's actually quite clear that it is more expensive to not respond to climate at this point. It was different, a couple of decades ago. Back then, it's like,
yeah,
oh, it's a lot of industrial upgrade. The damage isn't big yet. But the magnitude of damage has now gotten to a point where it is actually far too expensive. And the other economic mistake that we've made is, look, we know in business that, and generally people say this as well as even when they do a really light form of, being in the economy of just like trading stocks and bonds, right? We know that the presence of more true information is supposed to go drive a more efficient market. But we
mm,
basically built an entire economy off of this idea that the planet is infinite. That is fully untrue information, and that, companies can grow forever. Now, that said, I think there's a lot of growth that you can build into a company and people can get very, very rich. But if you start to factor in fully untrue things like, oh, this resource is infinite, that resource is infinite, the amount of pollution I can put into the environment is infinite, then you will make bad economic decisions just based on very simple principles of more information should drive better economic decision making. Instead, we've allowed ourselves to design an economy where we incorporate fully untrue information into the ways that we design things.
One of the things that's really got me, I'm pretty old, so I look back at where people used to have something called a debate. There doesn't seem to be a debate now. There seems to be a polarization, right? So we just had an event and we had some people disrupt it. And the event is a net zero event where people are trying to do things to save. And it was like, yeah, this is all greenwashing, right? And you
Mm.
get people saying, no, just stop it. Stop building AI. Stop building servers. Get rid of fossil fuel cars. Stop burning fuel, right? And young people particularly very enthused by that message that this is all evil and this is all wrong. And people like you and I have been around a while. We've contributed to this mess. And then you say to them, but how would you actually use that phone that you're organizing your protests? How's that being powered? Where's that coming from? Is there a problem that we've now got a very polarized viewpoint where you're either now, and you see it in your own country, what Trump's doing. But all around the world, people have these debates where they go, "You're either green or you're mean," in a simple
Yeah.
term.
Well, polarization and any binary actually tends to reduce the space of nuanced and coherent thought. And look, are there things in the world that are binary? Sure. But most things in the world are not. And when people
Mm,
are enforcing a binary, then there tends to be an agenda behind the binary. In this particular case, and for a lot of polarization, the agenda behind binary thinking is to create in-group, out-group dynamics so that people within an in-group have particular access to a message or power, all that sort of thing. And people in the
yeah,
out-group are external to that and can be rejected and shunned and all that sort of thing. And if that is the thing that is mechanistically happening, we should first ask, well, how useful is that? Right. I call this particular, the verb that overarches that particular set of behavior. I call it being a splinterist. And there's splinterists everywhere, right? Where you're splintering into little, and look, obviously there's left versus right sort of arguments, but actually even on the political left, there's splintering. Even on the political right, there's further
yeah,
splintering.
yeah.
And there will be a set of people that are always asking for loyalty tests that basically drive further and further splintering. But I will tell you that splinterists are actually accidentally keeping everything as it is. Because the more that we are divided, then the less power that we have collectively to actually change anything. So, I try to spend as much as my time as possible with unifiers and not splinterists. And I do work in agriculture and manufacturing. I'm in politically red states all the time, even though,
Yeah.
I come from more of a politically left, position. And in person, we really enjoy working with each other,
People are people. Yeah,
right? Because I'm helping to bring manufacturing jobs to the town. We're
yeah, of course.
helping to get, agriculture to be more sustainable and for the soils to be healthier over time as opposed to degraded over time. And I would tell you that given how quickly, we become friends, then a lot of the division is manufactured. It's manufactured by splinterists where the basic agenda is to splinter everything. And some of them are doing it earnestly because they think that the splintering and the purity test will go drive a really moral outcome. But other people are doing it, intentionally to go reduce the amount of power because all the groups become smaller and smaller and less connected.
Yeah,
I would tell you that whether people are doing it in good faith or bad faith, the net effect is still the same. We basically break into smaller and smaller groups and we have less collective power. So what I would suggest is a real simple set of ideas, which is spend less time with splinterists. Some of them might be your friends. I'm not saying to get rid of your friends. It's totally fine. But limit how much that shapes what you believe to be possible in the world because the world will probably not be built by splinterists. The world will probably be built by the builders.
yeah.
And the builders actually come from all backgrounds. And I work with builders across many backgrounds. And there's something that I like about being a builder, which is builders have to have build integrity, right? If you go put a bridge up and it falls down in 3 weeks, you're not going to be assigned to put up many more bridges, right? You lost
Hmm.
your job. And very similarly, when builders can't build a thing that actually stands up and works the way that it's meant to work in the world, then they need to go correct it. But a talker and a splinterist don't necessarily need to do that. They can say a thing and then contradict themselves 2 months from now. They can say a thing over and over and never build a thing, and the world doesn't really change in a meaningful way. What I love
Yeah,
about build integrity is that it forces you to be honest about things in a way that you don't have to be as honest in a debate, or if you have a splinterist kind of agenda, you don't have to be as honest. You can achieve the social goal while still lying. But I can't lie about how the bridge is put together. It will literally fall down. I can't lie about the verification of the circuit. It literally won't run. It just actually needs to
right. So
work.
it's,
And when
yeah,
you're around other people that need to get things to work, you move into a collective goal that brings people together as opposed to divides them. So what I would suggest for these people that really care about the world is go out there and build in the ways that matter to you. For some of the environmentalists that don't want us to do as much in industry, then great. Let's go build the kind of communities, let's do distributed, neighborhood solar, let's have gardens, let's go do the stuff. Let's already start building the world that we want. And for the folks that come from a lot more of a big company industrial mindset,
Yeah.
then yeah, like we are getting so much damage. Like we can't insure a lot of our homes anymore, which means home values are in big question now because entire huge swaths in Florida and wildfire country in California and all around, flooding zones, they can't be insured anymore. And even if you are a big company, big corporate, like, leader that like, wants everything to be very capitalistic, then man, you have a lot of building to do too. Everybody's got a lot of building to do to be able to go make the world that we need to make next. And you'll find that the people that are in the build tend to like each other better, no matter where they came from politically in the first place, because we all need to have build integrity. We all need to actually see a thing through to completion.
For the 1.5 degrees, right, which already some people say we're not going to hit it anyway, having this fixated target, having net zero at 20 as a fixated target, you have China saying we're not going to do it until 2070, India saying that, you've got other places pushing the bills. Look at the UK, desperately trying to reach it and costing our economy a lot, someone to argue right now, and bills are very expensive. And then you've got other people doing their own thing, being energy secure their own way. Have we got that all wrong? That has the whole volatility in the economic policies, whether it's based on not full science, I think the science is probably right, but it's become such a kind of mantra that it becomes all encompassing. So has that been the issue? We've set ourselves a target that realistically we haven't got the capacity of unity to achieve right now.
It's wrong, but it's wrong on a different level. And of course, this is just my perspective,
Now, of
but
course,
here's
yeah.
how I would explain what this is. And very quickly, like a small sidebar, like as mentioned, I was a corporate executive. I ran a couple multi-billion dollar
Of course.
businesses, and we're in an environment right now where people are very against executives. Look at all these rich people ruining everything. That's
Well,
ridiculous.
that was the next question, but yeah, yeah,
Oh, no, no. And
yeah,
let's talk about all of it together because I do
yeah,
think it's related. And because of that, then there's a big discounting of executive skill. Now, I was a person that rose up the ranks not because of privilege. I grew up quite poor. I rose up the ranks because I was actually skilled at leading teams and they
yeah,
gave me more responsibility, more responsibility. Now, I use this all as an intro because there are actual hard executive skills that are take a little time to go develop. And one of the things that I developed as an executive is I needed to be able to go and inspire teams with goals so that they could come together and go produce things in using their best work and do that repeatedly. And it meant every quarter I would need to get up in front of, the group and basically talk about the next quarter's vision and what it looks like to go do that. Right. So I
yeah,
think a lot about goal construction. And
yeah.
what has happened with 1.5 degrees C is we accidentally adopted a goal that fits in a type of construction, which I call a thou shall not goal, right? Thou shall not exceed 1.5 degrees C.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, when you look at the psychology of a thou shall not goals do not inspire the most energetic
No, no,
engagement, high creativity, like let's,
absolutely.
come together and like build something amazing.
Yeah, you'll not gain 20 pounds over Christmas. Exactly. Yeah, that's
Right.
exactly.
Well, actually, the most famous collection of thou shalt not goals are the Ten Commandments. And I very rarely see a person reads the Ten Commandments. It's like, oh, I'm so jazzed about life. I can't wait to do all these things with. No, they're like, oh my gosh, there's a way I can mess up. There's another way I can mess up. There's a
Yeah,
third way I can
yeah,
mess up. Right. And when you construct a goal in that way, thou shalt not exceed 1.5 degrees C, then there's just a lot of ways to screw up. It basically has that type of high anxiety, big failure feeling,
yeah.
and like, total damnation if you
Yes,
fail,
yes, yes,
right?
yes.
And when you do that, you are psychologically limiting your team. The team is like, team human. This is all the people on planet Earth are
Yeah, yeah.
basically going to be hurt collectively or helped collectively if we're able to step up. But the motivation on that team has been terrible. Now, the way that our firm approaches this is we recast the goal. The purpose of our firm is to help humanity become a net positive to nature. We believe that there will be a point in human history where nature is healthier every year that we're here because we're here. Now, the thing is we're not even close to that right now. But I literally tell the investors in our fund, in our firm, that yes, our goal really is to help humanity become a net positive nature. And I'm a physicist. I believe it'll take between 2 to 500 years
Right.
because I just try to tell them what it realistically takes. Now, if we cross 1.5 degrees C, which we actually already have,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
we're right on
yeah,
that cusp of crossing it, and you treat it as a thou shalt not goal, then everybody's going to feel totally collapsed. And
yeah. What's the point of doing anything?
why even try? Why
Yeah,
even, wake up? Why even have a next generation? But I'll tell you why to have a next generation, which is the solving of this problem is going to probably take 4 to 5 generations. And if the people that care the most completely give up and they're not able to pass any of those values and intention and effort, to future generations. And look, you don't need to do it through having kids. You can do it through teaching. You can do it through a lot of other things. But we need to both do this work earnestly and work at it incredibly hard and with urgency. But we also need to understand that the pausing of the melting of the cryosphere, the ice caps, and the bending of the curve back down so the ice caps start to refreeze, minimum 150 years,
yeah.
that we need to push on that. And if you start to understand that's the scale and scope of what it actually takes for humanity to become a net positive nature, then you start to get really focused and determined on what the actual solve looks like. Right. To me, it's actually, look, I know where people are coming from, like Extinction Rebellion saying like, oh, it's all over by 2030. But it's a very irresponsible handling of our psychologies because it means that there's going to be very earnest people that care a lot about the world that have been protesting, that have been working hard every day, and they're going to get to 2030 and they're going to crash out and like really not be able to go do as much work as they were hoping to, much less pass it on to another generation and another generation. I'm not saying to delay at all. Our team is quite urgent in the work that we do, but we also understand from the physics of it, even if we do everything right, we would be fortunate to solve 25% of the problem in our generation. Now, there was a point not that long ago, like the 1980s, we probably could have solved the whole thing in one generation.
Yeah,
We
yeah, of
did
course.
not choose to do that, right? Carl
It,
Sagan gave a
yeah,
great testimony in 1986. If we had just, and honestly, he predicted the numbers quite closely to what happened in the subsequent,
I've seen that
40
video clip.
years.
Yeah, absolutely. I've
Yeah,
seen that video
exactly.
clip. So,
But so he predicted it quite exactly. But like if we had gotten on it in that point in time, we probably would have been done in one, maybe 1.5 generations. We waited too long. It's a 4 generation task now, and we got to treat it seriously as if it is that.
for you, the obvious response would be, okay, you're one of these execs who's had a hallelujah moment. You made your money, you did all the things that have been kind of destroying the planet, building AI, servers, power, blah blah. Even though Google's trying to get cleaner, and now you've seen some coral reefs, and suddenly you've had a flip. How do you answer critics who'd throw that at you because they'd say, "Hang on, guy, you've been part of this whole big complex yourself."
I think that would be a fair judgment, and I think people should be allowed to feel whatever judgment that they want. I will also tell you that practically speaking, then I grew up in a poor immigrant family, so I like worked on the jobs that would pay me.
Yeah,
And I
of
actually cared
course.
a lot about the environment, as a kid too, but nobody wanted, honestly, being an astrophysicist, I was studying something that was out in nature. But nobody wants to pay you for that. So
No.
at some point, you just need to say, like, outside of any attraction to being hyper greedy, which I generally am not, I live in like a 700 square foot place, then, like, no, like, you do need to go and take the jobs that you can actually make a career out of.
Absolutely. I do agree with you.
Now, that said, the fact that I had a flip after experiencing a deep moment of grief is not necessarily a bug. It can be a feature. And what I mean by that is that think about the task of intergenerational care. Think about the efforts that one needs to do to be able to go see through a big change that is might be completely just, but it takes more than one lifetime to do. Right? For example, in the US, then there were people that were born in slavery, fought
Yeah.
slavery their whole lives, and died in slavery. And then they passed on the best things that they learned to the next generation who were born in slavery, fought their whole lives, and still died in slavery. And we had several generations like that before we actually had some interesting movement from the abolition perspective.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
similarly, we are going to be some of those generations as well. I almost know for a fact, unless miraculous things happen, that by the time I die, the actual state of the planet is going to be worse than when I was born. No
Yeah.
matter, even if I put the rest of my career into this thing, if you just follow the curves, it will be worse, which means, it is similar to being born in the problem, working real hard. In this case, half of my career, is going to be spent working on this problem. And we will die with the problem being a bit worse. That still needs to be the fight that you do if you're going to learn everything that you can in the generation to go pass on to the next generation the best things that you've learned to continue to fight, right? So at the end of the day, the sort of turnaround that I got from losing my reef was a turnaround that was inspired by grief. And I will tell you that, I've worked with a lot of people, and as a leader, I've seen the things that motivate people. And the people that are deeply dedicated, where they really stick with a thing for decades, I'm going to say 95% of the time it's motivated by grief, not by inspiration.
Wow.
Inspiration a little bit more fleeting. Oh, I was super inspired. So I,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
did a rock opera about so and
Yeah.
so, and I released it. And after 4 years of hard work, boom, I'm done. What am I inspired by next? And that's great. I love that mode of work. I'm a person that's created many things, and including creative things. And when people are in creative inspiration like that, great. But the people that are get in the grit and stick with things through hard times and
Mhm.
better times for decades, I'm going to say most of them are motivated by grief. So we don't need to look at grief as a problem. We can actually look at grief as a foundational kind of doorway that helps us get into intergenerational care. And when you think about the sort of task that needs to happen over several generations, we need to be successful at intergenerational care. Like a thing that we've really lost in this particular moment in history is that everybody's obsessed with scale, but they're only obsessed with this narrow sense of scale. Oh, they want to have the highest user count. They want to be in the most geographies. They want to make the most money. This is the sense of scale that we tend to promote these days. But there's another sense of scale, which is scale over time. Not that long ago, in Europe, people would spend 250 years building a cathedral. People
Yeah, of
spent
course.
hundreds of years building the pyramids.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
temples in Japan that are continuously maintained for 1,200 years. These are people that have decided to create goals in time, that scale in time. And as a civilization, we seem to have lost both the desire and the ability, at least for this moment, to be able to go care about things that take 100 years to get done, 200 years to get done. And I'm just going to say that at this particular moment for climate, for better or worse, we have made this into a multi-hundred-year effort because we waited too long. Now, do I want us to do as much as we can in our generation? Absolutely. We actually have a very pivotal role in terms of being, one of the first folks to go carry the baton, first generations to carry the baton, in that if we screw this up, it'll take 800 years. If we do the very best job that we can, it might take as short as 150 years. But we are deciding a pretty important, pivot here. We're deciding between whether it might happen in a century and some change, or whether it's going to take more like a millennia to get over the thing. So we have a very pivotal role. And that said, even if we do everything perfectly, there's still at least 100 years to go on this.
You've got kids, yeah, you said, I think earlier.
No, I don't have kids,
Okay.
but I have taught lots of students because I do spend a lot of time giving back through teaching. Yeah.
Right. So if you look at kids, I've got kids, and you look at where we are, is that depressing or is that positive, what you've just said there? That actually it's quite likely, and I was born in the 60s, so I actually grew up when the planet was quite wild, right? And it's
Yeah. Yeah.
suddenly in my lifetime in the 80s, I've seen all these things. I've seen, the change, deforestation wasn't a thing when I was a kid, it wasn't. And then by the time I was kind of in my teenage, suddenly the Amazon was being chopped down. So I've seen all these things, the technology jumps, the pollution, all of that, and you see what has happened. Are my grandkids still going to be fighting this fight? Are they going
Yes.
to have grandkids that are still fighting this fight?
The answer to both is yes. Like if you actually want to get the world back to repair, like similar to the kind of how it was in the decade you were born,
Yeah.
then yes, that is more than 100-year effort. So will your grandkids, will that still be going on? Does every single person need to work on it? Probably not. I think in our generation, it's maybe 10 million people need to be in this
Yeah.
profession.
Yeah.
And that will be enough to go work on all the key industries that we can and try to bend the curve from being something that can be accomplished, in 150 years as opposed to 800 or 1,000 years. right? So we have that role. And that said, we will also get our handle around a lot of important, decisions that like help to shape other things beyond the timeline. But like the actual execution of the whole thing, yeah, it will take at least through, your great grandkids, if not your great great grandkids, before you have the first day or the first year where humanity is in that positive to nature.
Last point. Capitalism, people say, caused this. But in the end, I can't remember what phrase you used about capitalism right at the beginning. Forgive me, but
It's just a stand-in for the phrase makes efficient, but it doesn't guarantee to make things available and it doesn't guarantee to make things just. If you
but
want to go add those, you need to explicitly add those.
but it could still help us out of this problem as well, in your belief.
Yes, because if you think about as a tool that can just be swapped in to make particular things efficient, then absolutely, there's particular spots of this. If we could put that tool in there and make a thing more efficient, then it makes a big difference. And actually, let me give you something really concrete on that because we do work on this very concretely. We have more than 50 investments that kind of match this profile. So we're in the weeds on all the industries that are doing the most damage to nature. There's about 30 industries that do 90% of the damage to nature across air, water, soil,
Yeah.
biodiversity. But here's a really useful thought because I think that without this, then people go down the wrong direction. Because we have believed for a while that ecology and economy are against each other,
Yes.
right? If you
Yeah.
succeed economically, you have to hurt the
Have
ecology.
to
If you
hurt the
succeed
planet. Yeah.
ecologically, you have to hurt economically. And given that, then it's shaped, again, binary thinking is shaped so much of our thinking, our policy, our actions. But here's what's really true. If you actually get into these physical industries that are doing the damage to the planet, because we're doing physical damage to the planet, we're not doing virtual, psychological, whatever, right? We're doing physical damage to the planet, to air, water, soil, biodiversity. So this is coming from physical industries. If you look at these physical industries and you break out their cost structure, 90% of the cost structure of all physical industries on the planet just fall in three categories. There's the feedstock cost, which is the atoms that you're going to use to physically produce the thing. There's the processing cost, which is the cost of the energy and the labor that you apply to those atoms to go transform it to the product that you're trying to make. And then there's transport logistic costs, which is the cost of getting those atoms to you and taking your end products away from you downstream to your customers, all sort of thing. And if you add that up, it makes sense. That'd be 90% of the cost structure of anything physical, and it is. But if you take one step deeper into that, you'll see that on all three of those major components of the cost structure, the ecological and the economic goals are fully aligned. If I could get a better outcome or the same outcome using one third the matter, then I save a lot on my input cost.
Of course.
And I also, right, so I'm making more money, but I'm also extracting less from the earth in the first place, fully aligned. Secondarily, if I'm able to make an equivalent or better good using 1/10 the energy, then great. I am both requiring less from the grid
Yeah.
and I am, and making more money, right? Again, fully ecology and economics aligned. And if I can reduce the transport logistic cost, I'm getting fewer transport emissions. I'm getting fewer microplastics from, tire wear, on roads, all that sort of thing. And again, I'm making more money for the company. And at the end of the day, the way that we look at things is we look at the 30 industries that are doing the most damage to the planet, like 90+% of the damage to air, water, soil, biodiversity. And though that cost structure is not broken up a third, a third, a third, there tends to be a fat underbelly to the cost structure. Oh, for petrochemical plastics, it's the energy cost for processing, right? For
Right.
sand and gravel, it's the transport costs for transport logistics,
Gotcha.
right? For farming, the input costs are really high, right? So it actually tells us exactly where to innovate to be able to get a big economic win and a big ecological win lined up. Now, the reason that we have this incorrect understanding of the world is there's 5% of the cost structure roughly. That varies a little bit from industry to industry. Sometimes it's only 1%, which makes this an even sadder situation. But there's about 5% of the cost structure that might be related to pollution. And only on pollution does the economic and ecological go
That's
head to
right.
head.
Yeah, that's where we see it. Yeah.
But that is the part where the government gets lobbied by the companies, and the companies do a bunch of ad campaigns, and they try to change the public consciousness so they can go and grab 5% more out of the cost structure. At the end of the day, most of the wins are happening behind the scenes, right? When an industry actually upgrades and gets, you know, twice the output for half the energy in, they don't even need to go to the government to lobby it. You never even hear about it. And because of that, that is invisible to folks. When the one spot where they disagree, the 5% that is about pollution, then that's the only thing that we hear about. But it basically poisons the public consciousness in terms of understanding the places where we can actually get the big solutions, which is feedstock costs, transport logistic costs, processing costs. And if you go and innovate on those areas, it's always an ecological win, it's always an economic win, and those two are fully aligned. We should also stop listening to companies about pollution. You know, just do the right thing regulatorily. Like, if they're talking about pollution, just get them out of here. So that's not really their role.
Brilliant. Do you know what? I could talk to you all day, and then that would be it. You'd be finished. You'd be done. I really appreciate your time, Tom. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Best of luck with everything you're doing, and best of luck with the book.
Okay, thank you so much.
All the best. Let us know what you think, ladies and gents. Great stuff. The book is called Climate Capital. Check out what he's been doing. Tom Chi, fantastic chance to get my brain buzzing. So I really appreciate your time. Thanks to Zoe for the production this week. See you on the next episode of the Net Hero podcast.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from futurenetzero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. futurenetzero.com. Better business, better planet.